Still, the porch light flickered above me as I read the message proving my son-in-law drained Emily's accounts behind her back. As the bulb hummed, I steadied my breathing, tracing one finger along the railing instead of exploding. While that faint buzzing grew louder, it felt like the house itself warning me of the lie I'd missed. The same trembling glow reminded me how betrayal always starts small, then blinds you when you're not looking. That's when I finally admitted he never loved her, he loved access. And in that soft, humming light, I decided access ends today. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. Jim Harlow arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early, a lifelong habit he never managed to break even in retirement. The place was one of those polished uptown Charlotte spots, dim lighting, linen napkins, and prices that quietly warned you not to order without thinking. He chose a table tucked near the window, where he could see Emily the second she walked in. She had texted him all week about this dinner. "Dad, you're going to love the ring in person." The excitement in her messages carried a warmth he hadn't heard in her voice for months, and he wanted to meet her joy with his own. But something inside him, that small, stubborn instinct forged from 40 years of auditing other people's money, kept his stomach tight. When Emily finally walked in, she was glowing, the kind of glow that came from hope rather than makeup. Her smile widowed the years between her childhood and now. And beside her, Brandon followed, shoulders back, chin high, wearing a suit that looked like it cost more than his monthly take-home. Jim rose to greet them, hugging Emily first, inhaling the familiar scent of her shampoo, anchoring himself in the comfort of it. Then she held out her hand. The ring caught the light and threw it across the table in a way that made Jim blink. A diamond that size didn't come from a mid-level sales manager's salary. It didn't even come from several salaries stacked together. The band alone looked handcrafted, platinum, custom cut, no doubt. It was excessive, showy, and completely out of place on Brandon's income. Brandon watched Jim's reaction like he had rehearsed it. "Beautiful, right?" he said, flashing a grin too polished to be humble. "Some guys get lucky and find a ring that matches their bride. I guess I just have an eye for quality." Jim lowered Emily's hand gently, studying the stone, then Brandon. "It's impressive," he said carefully. "Oh, don't worry," Brandon continued, waving off the implied question with a laugh. "I handled it. A few smart decisions, some bonuses coming in, you know how it is. When you want the best, you make it happen." Emily beamed, oblivious to the strain forming in her father's jaw. "Isn't it perfect, Dad? He told me he wanted something that would honor my worth." Jim smiled for her sake, but his eyes stayed on Brandon. While Emily looked down at her menu, Brandon's gaze flicked sideways, quick, sharp, evasive. The kind of movement Jim had seen hundreds of times from men who didn't want their numbers checked too closely. As they ordered dinner, Brandon kept sliding in little comments about future plans, building something big, and financial stepping stones, each more transparent than the last. He bragged about promotions that hadn't come through yet, bonuses on the way, and deals that were basically locked in. It was a performance, and the ring on Emily's hand was the opening act. Emily, bless her heart, heard romance. Jim heard calculation. She held Brandon's arm throughout dinner, leaning into him, hanging on every word. And every time money or stability lingered too long in the conversation, Brandon's expressive eyes darted left, right, down, anywhere but toward truth. Jim didn't interrupt, didn't challenge, didn't even raise a brow. But inside, something old and familiar tightened. A pull, a gut feeling, the sense that a crack existed beneath the surface and would widen with time. When dinner ended, Emily hugged him again, thanking him for meeting them. Brandon shook his hand with a grip too firm, a gesture meant to assert something, control, confidence, dominance. Jim had seen that kind of handshake before too. Driving home, Jim kept the radio off. The highway lights blurred past as he replayed every detail, the ring's size, the bragging, the restless eyes. And then, uninvited but sharp as ever, his father's voice echoed in his mind. Character shows in spending. People reveal themselves by what they buy and why. It was a lesson delivered decades ago, but it landed tonight with fresh weight. By the time he reached his lake house, the unease in his chest had deepened into something heavier. He went straight to the office, opened the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, and pulled out a folder sealed in a thick plastic cover. Emily Harlow, inheritance documentation, $9 million in assets, cash, stocks, land, compounded family history. He hadn't meant to open it tonight. He hadn't meant for his daughter's engagement dinner to ignite old instincts. And yet here he was, sitting at his desk under the soft glow of a lamp, the numbers staring back at him like a warning. Jim rested his hand on the folder, exhaling slowly. Something was coming. He could feel it in his bones. Jim chose the small cafe near Freedom Park because it was quiet on weekday mornings, the kind of place where you could hear a man's real intentions in the pauses between his sentences. He arrived early again, taking the corner table, watching the door, rehearsing the calm he needed to keep. He wanted to give Brandon a fair chance, or at least the illusion of one, before trusting the instincts that had kept his family's wealth intact for generations. Brandon walked in 10 minutes late, sunglasses still on, phone in hand, wearing the expression of someone whose time was too important for the room he'd entered. When he spotted Jim, he flashed that practiced, charismatic grin, the one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Harlow, thanks for inviting me. Coffee S on me," he said with an easy confidence that felt more performative than polite. They sat, ordered, exchanged surface-level pleasantries. And then, before the cups even cooled, Brandon leaned back and said, casually but intentionally, "So, I imagine this whole engagement has you thinking a lot about family, and well, estate planning." Jim didn't move, didn't blink. He let the words settle between them, watching how Brandon monitored his reaction like an investor studying a stock ticker. "My estate planning," Jim repeated, keeping his voice even. "Well, yeah," Brandon said, shrugging as if the question were obvious. "I mean, Emily's your only child. Marriage changes things, merges lives, families, finances. It's natural to think about transitions, future security, joint stability." He stirred his coffee with exaggerated nonchalance. "I just want to make sure Emily has everything she needs." Jim rested his hands on the table, fingers interlaced, the picture of controlled patience. "Estate planning is personal," he said mildly. Brandon nodded, but his eyes sharpened. Of course, I'm not asking for details. I'm just saying a marriage is about transparency, joint accounts, shared resources, planning for what's ahead." He lowered his voice slightly. "Emily deserves stability and clarity, you know." It was the kind of pressure disguised as concern that Jim had heard too many times from clients who wanted access to someone else's money, a tone that cloaked entitlement in responsibility. Jim didn't flinch. "Stability is earned," he said simply. Brandon held his smile, but a flicker of annoyance crossed his face before he could hide it. "Absolutely," he replied. "That's what I'm building, a stable future for us." Jim nodded politely, but internally he cataloged every word. The premature interest in inheritance, the push for joint accounts, the rehearsed language of a man fishing with a gold-lined net. When the coffee ended, Brandon stood, shook Jim's hand with the same overconfident grip, and said, "Glad we could talk openly, sir. Honest communication is the foundation of family." Jim watched him leave, the door shutting behind him a little too loudly, as if Brandon needed the last punctuation mark. The moment Brandon's car pulled out of the lot, Jim took out his phone and scrolled to a name he trusted more than almost anyone: Lisa Grayson. She answered on the second ring. "Jim, everything all right?" "I need to talk about Emily's inheritance," he said, walking slowly toward his truck. "I want to ensure it's protected, completely." There was a short pause, the kind Lisa only used when she sensed something shifting under the surface. "Protected from what?" she asked. Jim stared at the road for a long moment before answering. "From people who ask the wrong questions too early." Lisa inhaled, a sound of understanding rather than surprise. "Come in tomorrow morning, we'll take steps." Back home that evening, the sun dropping over the lake like a closing curtain, Jim prepared dinner without appetite. He kept replaying the conversation, each sentence confirming something he didn't want to admit. Brandon wasn't just curious. He was positioning himself, positioning for access. His phone buzzed on the counter. "Emily." He answered with a warmth he forced into his tone. "Hey, sweetheart." She sounded hesitant, like she was choosing her words carefully. "Dad, Brandon said he felt a little judged today. When you asked him to meet, he said you seemed distant, cold even." Jim closed his eyes. She had no idea. No idea what he had seen today. No idea what he feared would come next. "I wasn't judging," he said gently. "Just trying to understand the man you want to spend your life with." "I know, S," he murmured. I want you two to get along, that's all." "I want that too," Jim said. But the truth hovered in his silence, the truth he couldn't tell her yet. When the call ended, he set the phone down slowly. Something was shifting. Something had begun that morning over coffee. And Jim knew, deep down, this was only the first red flag. More were coming. Jim arrived at Lisa Grayson's law office early, though he didn't step inside right away. He sat in his truck with the engine running, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at the glass doors of the firm as if they were the threshold to a future he wasn't ready to face. Protecting money had always been second nature to him. Protecting it from his daughter's husband was something else entirely. After a long breath, he finally shut off the engine and walked in. Lisa greeted him with the same steady confidence she'd had from the very first day he hired her. Her dark hair was tied back, her suit immaculate, her tone calm in a way that suggested she'd already guessed why he was here. She motioned toward her office. "You sounded concerned on the phone, Jim. Sit. Tell me what's going on." He took a seat across from her desk, the leather familiar, the room filled with framed degrees and neatly stacked files. This wasn't a place for theatrics. It was a place for truths that changed the direction of families. Jim cleared his throat. "It's about Emily and the inheritance." Lisa folded her hands, waiting. He opened the folder he'd brought, the same one he'd stared at the night after the engagement dinner, and placed it in front of her. "It's time I disclose the full amount to you," he said quietly. "Not to Emily, to you." She studied his face before she opened the file, reading the hesitation there. Then she looked down at the papers. Land deeds, statements, asset balances. $9,250,000 in combined holdings, accumulated across generations of Harlow discipline and sacrifice. Lisa exhaled slowly. "Jim, this is substantial." "It's everything her mother and I planned for her," he said. "Everything our family built." "And you believe it's at risk?" He thought of Brandon's darting eyes, the casual probing about estate planning, the forced confidence in his tone. "Yes," Jim said. "I do." Lisa leaned back, assessing the situation with the precision she was known for. "Then we need to move fast. The cleanest way is a protected trust, undisclosed, accessible to Emily only under her own independent decisions, not marital decisions, not spousal influence, not joint financial actions." Jim listened, the weight of her words landing heavily. "She won't know about it." "She'll know she has a trust," Lisa clarified, "but not the structure, and certainly not the full value, not until certain milestones are met." He looked down at his hands. "I never wanted to hide anything from her. She's my daughter." Lisa softened her tone. "Jim, protection isn't punishment, it's prevention. You're not shielding her from herself, you're shielding her from someone else's intentions." He swallowed hard. "Still feels like lying." "Lying," she said gently, is when you deceive someone to take something from them. What you're doing is preserving what's hers. Jim sat in silence, torn between the love that wanted to trust his daughter completely and the instinct that refused to trust the man she was marrying. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced down. "Emily, look at these venues. Asheville looks magical in the fall, smiling face with 3 hearts." She sent 6 photos, mountain views, wooden arches, fairy lights. Each image carried her excitement, her hope, her belief in the future she was building with Brandon. Jim felt his chest tighten. Lisa watched him carefully. "This is the right step, Jim, especially if you're already seeing red flags." He nodded slowly, though his eyes stayed on the phone screen. "Let's do it." Over the next hour, Lisa walked him through legal structures, protective clauses, and financial safeguards. Jim initialed, signed, dated. Each signature felt like a nail in a door he wished he never had to close, but he kept going for her, not against her. When he finished the final signature, Lisa placed a hand on the folder. "She's safe now, Jim, no matter what happens." He wished hearing that brought him comfort. It didn't. Walking out to the parking lot afterward, the air felt heavier than the humidity promised. He climbed into his truck but didn't start it. The silence inside the cab wrapped around him, thick and suffocating, as if the documents he'd signed were sitting directly on his chest. He looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror, a 71-year-old father who wanted nothing more than to protect the one piece of family he had left. And yet, in protecting her, he had created a secret, a wedge, something Emily might see one day as betrayal. Another text pinged. "Emily, Dad, did you see them? Which one do you like? Brandon." Leaning toward the vineyard. She was happy, she was dreaming, and he was building walls she didn't even know existed. Jim closed his eyes, pressed a hand to the steering wheel, and exhaled shakily. "Better she resents me now," he whispered to himself, "than loses everything later." But even as he said it, he knew the real battle hadn't started yet. It was coming faster than he wanted. And this was only the beginning. The next few weeks unfolded in a blur of wedding talk, venues, menus, floral arrangements, color palettes. Jim tried to keep up, tried to be present, but every conversation seemed to reveal something new about the direction Emily's life was being pulled. What was supposed to be a simple, intimate ceremony had morphed into something grander, louder, and far more expensive than she'd ever dreamed of on her own. He noticed it first during a Saturday lunch when Emily brought a thick wedding binder to the table, flipping through page after page of glossy photos. "Brandon thinks the manor house would be perfect," she said, tapping a picture of a sprawling estate with manicured hedges and crystal chandeliers. "He says it fits the tone he wants." Jim raised an eyebrow. "Tone for a wedding? When did you start wanting something like this?" She hesitated, just long enough for him to see the truth flicker across her face before she covered it with a gentle smile. "I mean, it's mostly his mom. She keeps saying a wedding should be worthy of the Keene family." Jim set his fork down. "Worthy of the Keene family," he repeated quietly. Emily winced, as if hearing the phrase aloud made it sound worse. "Dad, she doesn't mean anything bad. She just thinks a wedding reflects the families coming together." Jim leaned back, studying his daughter. Her enthusiasm had been replaced with nervousness, like she was tiptoeing through someone else's expectations. "And what do you want?" "I just want peace," she admitted softly, "and for everyone to get along." The simplicity of her wish broke something in him. He closed the binder gently. "Emily, listen, I'll help, but I won't fund a circus. I can contribute something modest, something reasonable." She perked up a little. That would mean a lot. But later that evening, when Brandon stopped by to talk plans, his reaction told a different story. Jim explained his contribution clearly, an amount intended to support, not to bankroll extravagance. Brandon's smile stiffened, teeth tight, eyes narrowing just slightly before he masked the disappointment. "Oh," he said, "I thought maybe you'd want something bigger for Emily. She only gets married once." Jim held his gaze. Bigger isn't always better. For the first time, Brandon didn't hide his annoyance. "Well, we'll make it work," he said, voice clipped. "I just hoped you saw the value in a celebration that honors her." Jim didn't respond. The young man's disappointment wasn't rooted in love, it was rooted in unmet expectations. Financial expectations. That night Jim sat on his porch as the sun sank behind the lake, turning the water into rippled bronze. The ache in his chest grew as he replayed every detail. The ring, the probing questions about estate planning, the push for a high-end wedding. It felt like a pattern forming, a shape emerging, and he needed to see it clearly. He reached for his phone and dialed the person who never sugar-coated life. Tom Reeves answered on the second ring. "Evening, Jimmy." Jim didn't waste time. He told Tom everything: the extravagant wedding, Brandon's probing, the inheritance trust he'd set up, the pressure Emily was under. Tom listened quietly, only interrupting to ask for clarification. When Jim finished, there was a long silence. Then Tom sighed heavily. "I've seen this type too many times," he said. "Men who chase women not for love but for leverage. They're financial predators, Jim. They play the long game. They don't want your daughter, they want what surrounds her." Jim felt a chill crawl up his spine. "You think it's really that bad?" "I think your instincts have never failed you," Tom replied. "So don't start ignoring them now." Those words settled in Jim's chest like a stone. He trusted Tom, always had. And if Tom saw danger, it wasn't imagined. It was real. After they hung up, Jim moved inside, opened his laptop, and began searching. Quietly, methodically. He typed Brandon Keene's name into public record databases, credit reference sites, county filings. It was the kind of work he used to do in minutes as an auditor, digging, cross-checking, following threads. Small debts appeared. A few thousand here, a lingering balance there. Nothing catastrophic, nothing illegal, nothing that screamed danger. But something about the pattern bothered him: the restlessness in the spending, the inconsistency, the small patches of financial instability painted over with big words and flashy confidence. The numbers weren't large enough to prove anything. But they were enough to confirm something. Brandon lived above his means. And people who lived above their means always needed someone else's. Jim closed his laptop slowly. The lake outside had gone dark, the world settling into silence. But inside him, a stormline was forming, stretching across the horizon of his instincts. Something was coming. Something he could feel, but not yet prove. And he knew the real warning had only just begun. Jim was in his workshop that morning, sanding the edge of an old cedar board, when his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. He almost ignored it, assuming it was spam, but something, the instinct honed from years of finding what others tried to hide, made him answer. "Mr. Harlow," a steady voice said. "Detective Alan Mercer, Financial Crimes Division. We spoke briefly years ago at the banking conference." Jim's hands froze on the board. "Detective Mercer, yes, I remember. What can I do for you?" Mercer didn't waste a second. "I'm calling because your inquiry flagged something. You asked about public records on a man named Brandon Keene. That name came across one of our internal watch lists." Jim felt a slow, cold pressure spread across his ribs. Watch list? For what? There was a rustle of papers, and then Mercer's voice sharpened. "Mr. Harlow, Brandon Keene has concealed debt, a lot of it. Roughly $280,000 across multiple LLCs he dissolved right before moving to Charlotte." Jim's grip tightened on the sanding block. 280, he stopped himself, breathing once deeply. "You're certain?" "As certain as documents can be," Mercer said. "Credit lines under different business names, unpaid vendor invoices, a loan with a private lender that's still active. All hidden from public view unless you know exactly where to look." Jim set the sanding block down slowly, his fingers trembling. The workshop suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. Why would a man have that kind of debt under shell companies? Mercer hesitated only briefly. Because men like him use charm as a tool. He has a pattern: short-term relationships with women of means, luxury spending on their dime, and when the relationship dries up or when they stop financing his lifestyle, he moves on, quickly. Jim leaned against the workbench, steadying himself. He felt it like a punch. The ring, the extravagant wedding push, the probing about his estate. It all aligned now, fitting into the shape he'd feared but prayed was wrong. Mercer continued, voice firm but not unkind. If he marries your daughter and gains financial proximity, he'll see her as the next asset in his cycle. Jim closed his eyes, his chest tightening so severely he had to lower himself onto the nearest stool. Confirmation. Hard, undeniable confirmation. He had seen this type before: men who wore confidence like armor, charm like currency, and lies like oxygen. "Thank you," Jim finally managed. This helps more than you know." "If anything else surfaces, I'll call," Mercer said. "But Mr. Harlow, move carefully. Men under financial pressure can be unpredictable." The call ended, leaving silence that felt heavier than any truth Jim had carried in years. After a long moment, he pushed himself up and walked inside to his desk. His hands still shook as he dialed Lisa Grayson. She picked up immediately. "Jim." "It's worse than we thought," he said. "Mercer found concealed debt, 280,000, multiple LLCs dissolved, a pattern with wealthy girlfriends." Lisa didn't react with shock, only grim confirmation. "Then we're not just protecting Emily from risk, we're protecting her from financial exploitation." Jim nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "The trust, hide it deeper. Whatever layers you put in before, double them." "I'll restructure everything today," she said. "He won't touch a cent, ever." Jim ended the call and sat back in his chair, the weight of what he knew settling like lead in his stomach. He wanted to march straight to Emily, to tell her everything, to shake her out of the dream she was walking toward with open, hopeful eyes. But he couldn't, not yet. She wasn't ready to see Brandon clearly. She still believed the illusion. His phone buzzed again. This time Emily. He forced his voice steady. "Hey, sweetheart." Her excitement poured through the receiver instantly. "Dad, guess what? Brandon found this amazing house outside of Asheville. He says his new business success makes it the perfect time to buy. We're going to see it this weekend." Jim shut his eyes. "A house?" "Yeah, isn't it crazy? Things are happening so fast. I feel like everything is falling into place." Her joy cut straight through him, sharp and bittersweet. "Tell me about the house," he said, keeping his tone gentle, controlled. "What's the price range? What's the plan?" Emily laughed lightly. "Dad, don't worry. Brandon's got it handled. His new investors are really confident in him." Jim swallowed, the words scraping his throat. "And you're sure this is the right move? You feel comfortable?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I've never seen him so optimistic." He knew now exactly why Brandon was optimistic. He knew what this house represented: a trap, a setup, another step in a well-worn pattern of financial dependency and control. But he couldn't crush her happiness, not over the phone, not without evidence she could see for herself. When the call finally ended, Jim lowered the phone slowly, staring at the grain of the wooden desk. Barely above a whisper, he said the truth he could no longer deny. "He's setting her up." And the storm he'd sensed was no longer on the horizon. It was already here. Jim rehearsed the conversation a dozen times in his head before he ever spoke the words aloud. He didn't want to sound controlling or suspicious, or like the overprotective father Brandon always implied he was. He wanted to sound calm, rational, loving, the way a father should sound when he was trying to protect the one person he had left in the world. He invited Emily over for dinner on a quiet Thursday evening. He cooked her favorite lemon-roasted chicken, hoping the familiarity would soften the conversation he dreaded. She arrived cheerful, hugging him at the door, completely unaware that the truth he now carried sat like a stone behind his ribs. They ate slowly, talking about the wedding, her work, the house she and Brandon wanted to tour over the weekend. Jim listened, nodding, smiling where appropriate, until he felt the moment arrive like a shift in the air. He said gently, setting down his fork. There's something I need to talk to you about, something important. She looked up, eyes warm. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, he said softly. I want you to consider signing a prenup. Her smile fell instantly, as if a light had been switched off. For a moment she said nothing, just stared at him. Then, in a voice so small it almost broke him, she asked, Dad, you don't trust him? Jim leaned forward, trying to catch her gaze. Sweetheart, this isn't about trust, it's about protection. It's a standard legal safeguard. It protects both of you. Her lower lip trembled. Do you think he's using me? Is that what this is? Jim felt the ache in his throat. He couldn't tell her about the debt. Not yet. Not without proof she could accept. I think, he said carefully, that marriage should start with clarity, with fairness. A prenup ensures that. Emily pushed her plate away, eyes shining. Dad, he loves me, and I love him. Why would you even say something like this? Before Jim could answer, he heard footsteps on the porch. The door opened without a knock, a habit Brandon had adopted far too quickly. He strode into the kitchen with that swaggering, practiced confidence, his expression tightening instantly when he saw Emily's tears. What happened? He demanded. What did you say to her? Jim stayed seated, forcing himself to remain still. We were talking about a prenup, that's all, something responsible. Brandon's face darkened. Responsible? Are you kidding me? You're questioning my intentions. You're trying to undermine our marriage before we're even married. Jim didn't react, didn't rise to the bait. He had met men like this his entire career, men whose anger wasn't rooted in love but in threatened opportunity. Emily stood between them, torn, her hands shaking. Brandon, please. But he wasn't listening. This is unbelievable, he snapped. Emily, your dad thinks I'm after your money. He thinks I'm some kind of gold digger. Jim didn't move, didn't blink. I never said that, he replied quietly. You didn't have to, Brandon shot back. Suggesting a prenup says it for you. Before Jim could respond, another voice cut into the room, sharp, clipped, dripping with judgment. You know, Donna Keene said as she stepped inside, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor, I warned you, Emily. I warned you that old-fashioned thinking would sabotage your future. Jim felt the room tighten around him. Donna crossed her arms, chin lifted, her gaze aimed at him like a weapon. How dare you plant doubt in their marriage? How dare you imply my son isn't good enough? Jim stood slowly, breath steady. This isn't about being good enough. It's about being responsible. A prenup protects everyone. Donna scoffed. Protects? No, it insults. And frankly, it shows you don't believe your daughter is capable of choosing the right man. Emily burst into tears. Stop, she cried. All of you, please. Jim's heart cracked at the sight of her, pulled apart between the man she loved and the father who had never failed her. She looked at him with pain he had hoped she'd never direct toward him. Dad, why can't you just trust us? Trust, the word hit him like a blow. He didn't answer, not because he didn't have one, but because any explanation he might offer would only widen the divide. He couldn't defend the truth without revealing the secret, and he wasn't ready to lose her yet. Brandon wrapped an arm around Emily, pulling her protectively against him as if Jim were the threat. Donna stood behind them, victorious. Jim felt the distance grow, inch by inch, until it became a wall. He swallowed hard, forcing back everything he wanted to say. I only want you safe, he whispered. That's all. Emily looked away. And in that moment, Jim knew Something between them had broken. He grabbed his jacket slowly, his movements deliberate, heavy. Then he walked past them, out the door, down the porch steps. Each step felt like betrayal, not from him but against him. And as he reached his truck, the truth settled like a cold weight in his chest. The war had begun, and it had started with a single piece of paper. The days after the prenup confrontation felt like walking across thin ice, quiet, brittle, unpredictable. Jim tried giving Emily space, hoping emotions would settle and clarity would return. But instead of healing, something darker crept in, distance. A distance that wasn't hers, not truly. It was shaped, guided, engineered. It showed up first in the wedding group chat. Messages that used to be warm and full of exclamation points now arrived clipped, formal, as if written with someone looking over her shoulder. And Brandon's presence was obvious, even in the words Emily typed. One evening, Jim received a call he almost didn't pick up. Emily's name flashed across the screen. He answered instantly. "Hey, sweetheart. We need to talk about boundaries," she said, her tone stiff, rehearsed. "Brandon thinks it's best if we simplify the wedding planning committee." Jim paused, the meaning sinking in. Simplify how? There was a long silence before she exhaled softly. "Maybe you should step back from the planning, just for now." Jim swallowed. "Emily, is that what you want or what he wants?" Her voice tightened. "Dad, you questioning him constantly isn't healthy. We need unity, transparency." The word landed like a slap. It wasn't hers. It was his. Brandon's vocabulary, Brandon's tone, Brandon's influence creeping into her speech like a slow infection. "Emily," he said gently, "you're starting to sound." "I'm trying to be fair," she snapped. "You're making everything harder. If you can't support us, maybe it's better if you keep some distance." The call ended abruptly, leaving the room unbearably quiet. 2 hours later, Jim's phone buzzed again. A text message. "Emily, Dad, please don't come unless you support us." Jim stared at the words, disbelieving. His breath hitched, a crack forming so. Knew her deep inside him. It wasn't anger that came first, it was grief, heavy, immediate, raw. He sat down slowly on the edge of his bed, the phone still glowing in his hand, and for the first time since his wife's funeral, Jim cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears of an old man trying to be strong, but the kind that came from a wound ripped open. His shoulders shook, his breath broke, and for a moment he let himself feel every inch of the loss. His daughter, the one he raised, protected, loved with every corner of his battered heart, was slipping away. Not by choice, but by someone else's design. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, trying to steady himself, when the phone rang again. "Tom." Jim hesitated, then answered. His voice cracked on the single word, "Yeah." Tom didn't need explanations. He'd heard enough in Jim's tone. "You got hit with something." Jim read the text aloud, each word heavier than the last. Tom's voice hardened. "Don't you cave, Jim. Not now. This is exactly what that boy wants: to isolate her, cut you off, make her dependent. That's the playbook." Jim closed his eyes. "It's my kid, Tom," hearing that from her. "I know," Tom said gently, "but standing down won't save her. It'll hand her over, you hear me? Stay steady." Jim nodded, even though no one could see him. After they hung up, he forced himself to breathe, to think, to analyze the situation the way he once analyzed fraudulent balance sheets, with precision, not emotion. He needed more information, more proof, something undeniable. He opened his laptop again, the cold glow washing over his face. He searched through public filings, business registrations, cross-matching names and timelines. And there it was, a new entry. Brandon Keene, business loan application, filed 2 weeks earlier. Jim clicked it open. What he found made his stomach drop. The financial projections were inflated beyond anything realistic, pure fiction. Claims of revenue streams that didn't exist. Partnerships never signed. It was the same pattern Mercer had warned him about. Build a company on lies, use someone else's money to prop it up, and when it collapses, blame the world. The worst part wasn't that the numbers were fraudulent. It was that Brandon was planning for Emily to be the bailout. Jim leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose, feeling the weight settle deeper. Every beat pointed in the same direction. Brandon wasn't just dangerous. He was preparing a trap big enough to swallow his daughter whole. Jim stood and walked to the window, staring out at the lake. Its surface was still, but he knew better. He knew storms gathered long before the first wave broke. He closed his eyes, inhaled, and whispered to himself, "It's happening. The countermove, it's time." Because now it wasn't about suspicion. It was about survival, financial, emotional, familial. And Jim Harlow was done being passive. The next move would be his. Jim arrived at the wedding early, as he always did for the things that mattered. The Asheville venue perched on a hillside overlooking rows of orange-tipped trees, the kind of view that belonged in a magazine. Cars lined the gravel drive, clusters of guests moved in small groups, and the wind carried the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. It was beautiful, painfully beautiful, and yet Jim stepped out of his truck with a calm so deliberate it felt like armor. He walked toward the ceremony space, past a stone arch trimmed with white roses, past servers carrying champagne flutes, past guests who looked at him with polite, detached smiles. He didn't mind. He wasn't here for them. He was here for his daughter, for the promise he made to her mother, for the last thread of hope he still held. Emily spotted him first. She lifted her bouquet slightly, eyes softening, relief flickering across her face. But before she could move toward him, Brandon appeared at her side, guiding her back behind the curtain with a firm hand on her waist. Brandon glanced at Jim only briefly, his eyes sliding away the moment they met, as if he couldn't risk whatever truth he might see reflected there. Donna approached next, her heels crunching against the gravel, her smile stretched so wide it bordered on artificial. "Jim," she said with a syrupy sweetness that felt more like mockery, "I'm glad you made it, truly." Jim nodded politely. "Wouldn't miss my daughter's wedding." "Oh, of course," she replied, patting his arm with a familiarity he didn't welcome. "Family unity on a day like this is so important." Then she drifted away before he could respond, leaving behind a faint cloud of perfume and hypocrisy. The ceremony began moments later. Guests settled into rows of white wooden chairs while soft piano music played. Jim sat alone near the front, hands resting on his knees, every sense heightened. When Emily walked down the aisle, he felt his breath catch. She was radiant, glowing in a way that made him think briefly, painfully, of her mother, but beneath the glow he saw something else too, strain. The smile she wore didn't reach her eyes. Brandon stood waiting under the arch, shoulders squared, jaw tight with pride and something else, victory perhaps. The officiant welcomed them, spoke about love and trust, and then invited them to share their vows. Brandon went first. His voice was strong, confident, rehearsed. "Emily," he began, "marriage is about unity, about becoming one, about sharing everything, our dreams, our future, our responsibilities." His eyes shifted deliberately toward Jim. "And our resources, no secrets, no walls, a complete merging of two lives." He let those last words hang in the air, heavy, pointed. Jim felt the message as clearly as if it had been whispered into his ear. A performance, a reminder, a declaration of entitlement disguised as devotion. Emily's turn came next, and she unfolded a small sheet of paper with trembling fingers. Her voice wavered as she read, "Brandon, I promise to support your vision, to stand beside you as we grow together, to be transparent in everything we do to build a future where we share all we have." Jim's heart tightened. These were Emily's words. This wasn't her voice. The phrasing, the cadence, the concepts, they echoed Brandon's language perfectly, as if he had coached her, as if he had written them himself. He watched her closely, noting the small flinches, the forced smile, the way her hand tightened around the paper. She wasn't reading vows. She was reading a script. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Brandon pulled her into a kiss that was more performance than affection, followed by a triumphant glance in Jim's direction. At the reception, the manipulation became louder. Brandon moved through the room like a man stepping into a role he'd rehearsed his entire life. He bragged openly to his friends, to distant relatives, to anyone who would listen. "We're planning a few joint investments after the honeymoon," he announced to a small group near the bar. "You know, putting our resources together, building an empire as a couple." Jim stood nearby, silent, watching. Every word was a clue. Every brag was a warning. He could see the scaffolding of Brandon's intentions rising around Emily like a financial cage. Emily, meanwhile, floated through the reception with stiff smiles, responding to guests politely. But every time Brandon spoke, she flinched slightly, as if bracing for something. Near the end of the evening, Jim stepped outside to the quiet space behind the venue. Stars dotted the sky above the dark tree line. For a long moment he just breathed, letting the night steady him. Then he pulled out his phone. He dialed Lisa Grayson. She answered quickly. "Jim, how's the ceremony?" Jim watched the lit windows of the reception hall, the silhouettes moving inside, the life his daughter had just entered, unaware of the traps laid beneath it. He exhaled once, firm, resolved. "It's time." And with those two words, the countermove finally began. Jim arrived at Lisa Grayson's office early in the morning, carrying the same folder he'd been guarding for months. The sky over Charlotte was a muted gray, the kind that made everything feel heavier, quieter, more decisive. He paused outside her door for a moment, gathering himself, reminding his heart why he was doing this, not to control Emily, not to punish her for falling in love, but to protect her from a deception she was still too blind to see. Inside, Lisa greeted him with a nod that carried no judgment, only readiness. "You sure you want to move forward today?" she asked, motioning him toward the conference table where stacks of documents waited. Jim sat slowly, his hands steady even though nothing inside him felt steady at all. "After what I saw at that ceremony," he said, "yes, there's no turning back." Lisa slid the first packet toward him. "This is the final trust structure. Once you sign, it activates. Emily has zero access until the conditions are met independently, not jointly, not through marriage, not through pressure." Jim scanned the documents again, even though he already knew every clause by heart. Provisions for long-term stability, protections against spousal influence, ironclad language shielding her assets from any claims Brandon might attempt. Separate, unmergeable, untouchable. "This will hold up in court?" Jim asked. Lisa nodded. "In any court, I've documented everything. Your reasoning, your timeline, the red flags you observed, your history as a fiduciary, your father's trust precedent." She tapped a thick binder beside her. "All of it is logged with timestamps. If Brandon ever tries to challenge you or manipulate her into challenging you, you're protected." Jim exhaled slowly. The weight of that binder wasn't just legal armor. It was the story of a father doing everything possible to keep his daughter safe from a man who had never loved her, only targeted her. Lisa pointed. "At the signature line, this activates it." His hand hovered for a moment. He thought of Emily at 5 years old, running barefoot across the lake house lawn. He thought of her first heartbreak, her first job, her laughter echoing through the kitchen while her mother cooked. He thought of the trust she had always had in him, a trust he feared he was about to fracture even further. Then he signed. Lisa stamped everything with precise, deliberate motions, binding the documents into their final state. "It's done," she said quietly. "The trust is now fully protected." Jim leaned back in his chair, staring at the documents, feeling both relief and guilt surge inside him simultaneously. "I wish she didn't need this," he murmured. Every parent wishes that, Lisa replied gently. But protection is an act of love, not betrayal. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Before he left, he pulled out his phone and showed Lisa the latest screenshot Mercer had sent him. A list of Brandon's dissolved LLCs, each tied to unpaid debts or abandoned ventures. "I'm sending Mercer the updated trust info and the timeline," Jim said. "He needs to know where things stand in case Brandon escalates." "Good," Lisa replied. "And Jim, be ready. Men like him don't take losing well." As Jim walked out of the office, he felt the full weight of the countermove settling into place. The steps had been taken. The walls had been built. The last shield his daughter didn't even know she needed was now locked around her future. In the parking lot, he sat in his truck and opened his phone. The first thing he saw was Brandon's social media feed, public now that he was married, flaunting every ounce of his new life. Pictures from Maui, each more extravagant than the last. A suite overlooking the ocean. Champagne on private balconies. A caption that read, "Honeymoon goals, building our empire one memory at a time." Jim's jaw tightened. Empire. The same word Brandon had bragged about at the reception. A word that meant opportunity, not partnership. Another notification appeared, an email from Emily. He hesitated before opening it. Her message was short. "Dad, I wish Mom were here. I'm trying to feel close to everyone, but things feel off, like we're drifting. I don't know what to do." Jim felt the breath leave his body. For the first time, Emily wasn't parroting Brandon's vocabulary. This was her voice, raw, uncertain, reaching for something familiar. He wanted to reply immediately. To tell her she wasn't drifting, she was being pulled. To tell her he loved her, that he saw what she couldn't yet see, that he would never stop protecting her. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, the words forming and dissolving in his mind. But then he stopped. Responding now would open a crack Brandon could exploit. It would invite guilt, pressure, manipulation, all aimed back at him. He needed to stand still, to stay quiet, to let the truth reveal itself on its own. Jim locked his phone, placed it face down on the passenger seat, and exhaled with quiet resolve. For the first time, the countermove was complete. Now, all he could do was wait for the storm he knew was coming. Maui looked like paradise, sapphire water, soft winds, sunsets that melted straight into the ocean. But for Brandon Keene, none of it mattered. Because the moment he tried to access what he believed was his new financial future, paradise cracked. It started early in the morning while Emily was showering, steam drifting from the bathroom door. Brandon sat on the hotel balcony with his laptop open, scrolling through financial portals he thought he now had backdoor access to. Trust summaries, marital asset projections, expected payouts. Every attempt failed. Every login denied. Every request restricted due to authorization limitations. At first he assumed a glitch, then he tried again and again. His jaw tightened with each rejection. By the fourth attempt he was sweating, by the sixth he was shaking. When Emily stepped out in a white sundress, towel around her hair, she found him hunched over the laptop like a man trying to decode a bomb. "Brandon," she asked softly, "what's wrong?" He snapped the laptop shut. "Nothing." But fury rippled under his voice. Emily moved closer. "What happened?" He inhaled sharply like he was swallowing rage. "Your trust, it's locked, fully, every access point, every financial channel." She blinked in confusion. "What do you mean locked?" "It means," Brandon said, rising from the chair so suddenly she stepped back, "your father hid your inheritance. He sealed it behind some kind of legal firewall and didn't tell you." Emily felt her stomach drop. "That can't be right. Dad wouldn't." "Wouldn't what?" Brandon barked. "Wouldn't sabotage us. Wouldn't interfere. Emily, I tried to plan for our future, for our investments, for the house. And every time your father's name popped up as the trustee, blocking everything. She stared at him, stunned. Why were you trying to access it? We haven't even discussed. Oh, please, Brandon cut her off. It's our money now. Marriage merges things, that's what adults do. Emily opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, the air tightening around her ribs. Brandon grabbed his phone. Call him. What? No. Call him. The command burst out of him like a crack of thunder. Emily's hands trembled as she dialed her father's number from the hotel balcony. Jim answered on the second ring, his voice calm, steady, the voice she'd grown up trusting. Everything okay? She swallowed hard. Dad, did you hide my inheritance? Silence stretched for a moment, a silence heavy enough to answer the question on its own. Jim's voice was steady but gentle. I protected it from anyone who'd misuse it. Emily felt a gasp claw its way from her chest. Misuse? Dad, what? Before she could finish, Brandon snatched the phone from her hand. You had no right, he screamed. Guests at neighboring balconies turned their heads. You destroyed our life plan, you sabotaged our future. Who the hell do you think you are? Jim didn't raise his voice, didn't react. I'm a father, he said quietly, and a father protects what his daughter can't yet see. Brandon let out a raw, furious noise and paced the balcony like a caged animal. I swear to God, I'll fight you on this. Donna already called an attorney. You think you can just hide millions and pretend it's noble? Emily's head whipped up. My mother called an attorney. Brandon ignored her, tightening his grip on the phone until Jim could hear the plastic creak. You think you're smarter than everyone, Brandon spat. But this is illegal. You can't just move money around and create secret trusts. Donna said we can force disclosure. Jim almost smiled, though there was no joy in it, only truth. Good luck proving fraud-free intentions. A beat of silence. Then a roar. Are you accusing me? Jim cut him off quietly. I don't accuse, I verify. Brandon hurled the phone onto the chair, chest heaving. Emily stood frozen, hands shaking, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Everything she thought she understood about her marriage, her father, her future, it all cracked in one brutal moment. Brandon spun toward her, voice shaking with rage. Your father just stole our life, Emily, and you're going to stand there and let him. Her throat tightened. I don't know what's happening. Of course you don't, he shouted. He treats you like a child, he controls everything. She stepped back, stung. Don't yell at me. But he was too far gone to hear her. Inside Jim's study, thousands of miles away, the phone lay silent in his hand. He could picture his daughter's tears, Brandon's rage, Donna's manipulation, a perfect storm he had predicted long before the vows were spoken. He exhaled slowly, staring out at the lake behind his home. This was the moment everything would tip. The moment truth began forcing its way through the cracks. And the moment the mask Brandon had worn so carefully finally began to slip. The call had ended, but the battle was only beginning. Emily returned from Maui 3 days earlier than planned. She didn't call ahead, didn't warn anyone, didn't send a single message. Jim only knew she was home when he heard the sound of a car door closing outside his lake house, followed by footsteps on the gravel. He looked out the window and saw her standing by her car, shoulders slumped, suitcase half unzipped, eyes red and swollen. The sunlight hit her from behind, outlining her like a silhouette of the daughter he used to know, not the one who drifted into someone else's orbit. He stepped onto the porch but didn't move closer. Not yet. She didn't look ready to be approached. She looked shaken, as if the honeymoon wasn't a celebration but a battle she barely survived. She didn't speak right away. She just stared at the lake for several long seconds, gathering strength she didn't seem to have. Finally, she whispered, I couldn't stay there. Jim nodded slowly, letting her set the pace. You want to come inside? She shook her head. "I need a minute." He respected that. He stayed on the porch, silent, watching her breathe in the cold morning air. When she finally turned toward him, he recognized something new in her eyes, not defiance, not anger, but a fragile, painful confusion. "Dad," she said softly, "things got bad, worse than I expected." Jim's hands tightened on the porch railing, but he forced himself not to rush to her, not to pull her into a hug she wasn't ready for, not to say the 100 things he'd carried like stones in his chest. "What happened?" he asked carefully. Her voice cracked. "He blamed me for everything, for the trust, for not knowing, for not asking you." She wiped at her nose with a shaky hand. "He said I was useless financially, that I didn't bring anything to the table except potential." Jim's jaw tightened, but he stayed still. Let her talk. Let her unravel the truth at her own pace. "He kept pacing the room after you hung up," she continued, "saying I embarrassed him, that I didn't understand how money works, that I would have been set if I'd only convinced you." She swallowed hard. "I didn't even know who I was talking to anymore." Jim felt something inside him fracture, not because of what Brandon said, but because Emily believed enough of it to look guilty standing in front of her own father. "Emily," he said quietly, "you are not useless, not financially, not in any way." She nodded, but the doubt still lingered in her eyes. "Dad, how much do you really know about him, about his businesses, about what he's doing?" Jim's breath froze in his chest. This was the opening he'd been waiting for, but it wasn't time. Not yet. If he pushed too soon, she'd retreat. If he unloaded everything he knew, she'd shut down. He needed to move carefully, gently. "I know enough to be concerned," he said, "but I want you to tell me what you saw." Emily looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "I saw anger and control, and someone who's hiding things. I kept asking him where the money from his business was coming from, and he'd snap at me, change the subject, or say I was educated enough to understand." Jim swallowed his fury. "Did he give you any answers at all?" "No, just demands, and plans I didn't agree to, and pressure to confront you." She breathed out shakily. "It scared me, Dad, it really scared me." A gust of wind swept across the lake, carrying a few dead leaves across the porch. Jim wanted to tell her everything about the concealed debts, the dissolved LLCs, the private lenders who didn't forgive easily. But it wasn't the moment. So he did the hardest thing he'd done yet. He gave her space. "You don't have to talk about it now," he said gently. "You're safe here, take your time." Emily nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I think I need to figure some things out." He stepped back, allowing distance, not pressure. "I'm here when you're ready." Later that afternoon, after she left with the promise to call, Jim sat at his desk staring at Mercer's latest message. Mercer found new evidence. Keene owes money to private lenders, not banks, individuals, high-interest agreements, dangerous ones. Jim read the message twice, feeling the warning behind every word. Private lenders didn't disappear quietly. They didn't forgive debts. They took collateral, and sometimes that collateral wasn't financial. He called Mercer immediately. "What kind of lenders?" Jim asked. "The kind who don't want their names on paper," Mercer answered, "and the kind who won't be patient much longer." Jim ran a hand over his face. He had feared this, and now it was confirmed. Brandon wasn't just irresponsible, he was desperate. That evening, as Jim stood by the lake, watching the sun sink behind the trees, his phone buzzed again. A message from Emily. "Dad, can we meet? Just us, I need to talk." Jim felt something move inside him, a fragile thread of hope pulling tight, but wrapped in it was worry. Heavy, dark, real. She was coming to him. But what she would say next could change everything. Jim chose a quiet booth at the back of the lakeside cafe, far enough from the lunch rush that Emily wouldn't feel watched. He arrived early again, habit, instinct, and anxiety bundled together, and sat with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold by the time she walked in. When Emily stepped through the door, he saw the hesitation in her posture. Shoulders drawn in, hands tucked into her sleeves, eyes scanning until they landed on him. She approached slowly, like someone carrying something fragile inside her. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. Jim stood and kissed the top of her head, something he hadn't done in months. "Hey, sweetheart, sit. Take your time." She slid into the booth, her fingers fidgeting with the napkin. Silence lingered, heavy but necessary, until Emily finally exhaled. "Brandon wasn't always like this," she began. "I mean, he had moods, sure, but after you mentioned the prenup, something in him shifted." Jim kept his expression steady, inviting, letting her continue. "He got calculated," she said. "Cold. It was like every conversation became a test. He'd say we needed to be aligned financially, but what he meant was he needed access. Full access." She swallowed. "And he wanted me to get it from you." Jim's chest tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Emily stared at her hands. "He started putting papers in front of me. Convenience forms, he called them. Things to speed up joint accounts, streamline taxes, approve investment opportunities. I didn't understand half of them." Jim leaned in slightly. "Did you sign anything?" She hesitated, long enough for him to feel his stomach twist. "Emily," he said gently, "I need to know." She nodded slowly, shame darkening her face. I signed a couple, because he said married couples trust each other, and because I wanted peace." Jim breathed out through his nose, steady even as his pulse jolted. "Do you have copies?" "I don't know," she whispered. "Maybe they're somewhere in my email, but if he finds out I'm looking." He raised a hand, not to silence her, but to calm her. "Sweetheart, listen to me. There's no judgment here. You're not in trouble. I just need to see what he put in front of you." Her eyes watered immediately, the dam breaking. "Dad, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know he was lying. I just wanted him to stop being angry." Jim reached across the table and took her trembling hand. "Emily, look at me." She lifted her eyes slowly. "Truth protects," he said. "Not secrecy, not silence, truth. If you show me what he had you sign, I can help untangle it, but I need the truth." Her breath shuddered. "I'm scared." "I know," he said softly, "but I'm right here and you're not alone." For the first time in months, she let the tears fall openly. "He kept telling me I needed to talk to you about the inheritance, to make you see reason. He said if I loved him, I'd get you to unlock it. He made it sound like our whole future depended on it." Jim felt something inside him shift, not anger at her, but a painful clarity. She wasn't complicit. She was groomed, manipulated, used by a man who had chosen her not for who she was, but for what she could provide. Jim squeezed her hand gently. "Emily, you didn't do anything wrong. You were pressured, controlled, and you didn't know." She covered her face with both hands, her voice breaking. "I feel so stupid." "Don't you ever say that," Jim said, his voice quiet but firm. "Being loved isn't stupid. Trusting someone isn't stupid. The person who misused that trust, that's where the shame belongs, not with you." She looked up, eyes red, lip trembling. "Dad, I'm so sorry for the things I said, for pushing you away, for choosing him over you." He shook his head. "You didn't choose him, you were surviving him." A tiny sob escaped her as she stood abruptly from the booth. Jim rose too, unsure of what she needed, space or closeness, until she stepped around the table and collapsed into his arms, burying her face against his chest. It was the first time she'd hugged him in months, and the emotion of it hit him with the force of memory, of holding her as a child, of comforting her through scraped knees, heartbreaks, losses. He wrapped his arms around her, strong and steady. "I've got you," he whispered. "I've always got you." They stayed like that for a long time, the world moving around them, unaware of the quiet fracture mending between father and daughter. When they finally pulled apart, Emily wiped her face. "Can we meet tomorrow? I want to show you whatever I can find." Jim nodded, hope rising but tangled tightly with worry. "Tomorrow," he said, and he knew the truth she brought would determine the next battle he'd have to fight. The calls started before sunrise. Jim was up early, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, reviewing the documents Emily had forwarded from her email. Half-finished forms, vague authorization agreements, and thinly veiled financial traps. He was highlighting key sections when his phone lit up for the first time. "Br and Keen calling." Jim stared at the screen but didn't move. The phone buzzed until it went silent. 30 seconds later, it rang again. Then again. By the fifth call, Jim put the phone face down on the table. He didn't need to hear Brandon's voice to know what the man wanted. The desperation was already in the frequency of the calls, fast, frantic, relentless. When the voicemail notification appeared, Jim finally picked up the phone and pressed play. "Jim," Brandon's voice snarled, already on the edge of breaking, "you know damn well what you're doing. We need that trust opened. It's what's owed. Emily is owed that money. I am owed that future. Don't." The message cut off before finishing. Jim deleted it. Another call came in instantly, as if Brandon had been waiting for the exact moment the voicemail ended. Jim muted the phone. The buzzing continued, vibrating against the table like a trapped insect. Eventually, he blocked the number. The silence that followed wasn't relief, it was a warning. Because silence from desperate men always came before impact. 2 hours later, the doorbell rang. Jim opened the door to find Donna Keene standing on his porch in a tailored coat and oversized sunglasses, her posture stiff with indignation. Her smile was stretched tight, the kind of smile used right before a verbal attack. "Jim," she said, brushing past him into the foyer without waiting to be invited, "we need to talk." Jim shut the door behind her, moving with the calm patience he reserved for difficult clients and dangerous situations. "Donna, now's not a good time." "Oh, nonsense," she said, waving off his words. "I'm here because you have created a deeply unfair situation for my son, and for Emily. You owe us some explanations." Jim crossed his arms. "I owe you nothing." Donna's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me." He motioned to the living room. She refused to sit, choosing instead to stand in the center of the room like an accuser in a courtroom. "My son tells me," she said sharply, "that you've hidden Emily's inheritance, that you've manipulated legal documents to keep both of them from accessing what rightfully belongs to their marriage. Is that true?" Jim studied her carefully. "Emily's inheritance belongs to Emily, period." Donna scoffed loudly. "Oh, don't insult me. You know how marriage works. Assets become shared. Futures become shared. Are you so determined to control her that you de-sabotage her financial foundation?" Jim's voice stayed level, almost quiet. "Emily's inheritance isn't a dowry, and it will never be used to pay off your son's debts." Donna's face darkened. "Debts? What debts? Brandon's business is thriving." Jim didn't smile, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Donna, I'm done playing along with this act. I know about the LLCs, the private loans, the unpaid vendors, and the fraud." Her mouth parted, but no sound came out. "He's in over his head," Jim continued, "and he expected Emily's inheritance to bail him out. You expected that too. That's why you're here." Donna snapped out of her shock and straightened her coat sharply. "You have no proof, and even if you did, we'll see what a judge says once our attorneys get involved. You think you can hide millions without consequence." Jim stepped closer, not threatening, simply immovable. "The trust is legal, the protections are airtight, and any attorney you bring in will see exactly why those protections were necessary." For the first time since she entered, Donna's confidence cracked. A small, involuntary tremor crossed her jaw. She grabbed her purse, marched toward the front door, and turned sharply. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "Brandon won't let this go, and neither will I." Then she slammed the door behind her. Jim stood in the quiet hallway, his breath steady, his mind already moving to the next step. He didn't know how soon Brandon would strike again, but he knew it wouldn't be long. Minutes later, his phone buzzed with a message from Detective Mercer. Mercer just confirmed new information. Brandon falsified at least 2 documents tied to those LLCs. Clear evidence of fraud. I'm pulling the full files now. Jim let the message sink in. Fraud wasn't just wrongdoing, it was leverage, and leverage changed everything. He stared out the window, the lake rippling with a cold wind, the branches shifting like unsettled warnings. He had known for months that this moment would come, that there would be a point where suspicion hardened into proof, where protection became confrontation. That point was now. He took a slow breath. The buildup was over. The clash phase was coming. And he would be ready. Jim knew the moment he heard the engine too fast for the gravel road, too loud for the quiet lakeside, that Brandon was coming. The sound cut through the stillness of the afternoon like a threat made of metal and rage. Jim stepped onto the porch, steady, hands in his pockets, watching the silver sedan skid to a stop in a spray of dust. The car door flew open. Brandon stormed toward him, face red, chest heaving, eyes wild with a fury that had nowhere left to hide. "You," he spat, jabbing a finger at Jim. "You ruined everything." Jim didn't move, he didn't step back, he didn't raise his voice. "Calm down." "Don't you dare tell me to calm down," Brandon shouted, pacing like a man looking for a wall to punch. "You destroyed my business. You poisoned Emily against me. You think you can play puppet master with her life and mine. I'm not scared of you." Jim didn't respond. He simply opened the front door behind him. Emily stepped onto the porch, standing just behind her father. Her hands trembled, but she held her ground. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but filled now with something different: resolve. The sight of her only sent Brandon into a sharper spiral. "Oh, so this is how it is now," he snarled. "You hide behind him. You let him dictate your marriage like you're still a child." Emily flinched, but Jim lifted a hand slightly, not touching her, just steadying her with presence alone. "Brandon," Jim said calmly, "this ends today." Brandon laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "Ends? Nothing ends until I get what I'm owed." Jim tilted his head slightly. "And what exactly do you think you're owed?" "Access," Brandon shouted. "A chance to build our future. That trust is marital property. You can't keep it from us." Jim's voice was level, precise, the same tone he had used in boardrooms when exposing financial lies. "Emily's inheritance is protected because you made it necessary. The hidden debt, the dissolved LLCs, the forged signatures on vendor contracts, the fake revenue projections on your loan applications." Brandon froze. For a split second the facade cracked, not anger, fear. Jim continued, undeterred. "You've been running a financial collapse under the illusion of growth. You're in debt to private lenders. And the moment you married Emily, you planned to use her inheritance to pay it off." Brandon's mouth opened, but no words came out. Emily stepped forward now, her voice small but steady. "Is that true? Did you really? Were you planning to use my inheritance to cover your debts?" Brandon didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence screamed the truth. Jim took a slow breath. "Detective Mercer has everything. The signatures, the records, the timelines. You weren't careful, Brandon." Brandon's entire posture shifted, shoulders tight, eyes darting, breath shallow. "Mercer," he whispered, "you went to the police." Jim didn't blink. "I didn't have to go to them. They were already watching you." Panic struck him like a physical blow. His hands shook, his jaw clenched, the bravado evaporated. "You had no right," Brandon hissed, voice cracking. "I was building something, we were building something." Emily wiped a tear from her cheek. No, Brandon, you were using me, using us. He stared at her as if the world had tilted. Emily, baby, no, you don't understand. I did all of this for us, for our future. Her voice broke, but her words didn't. A future built on lies isn't a future, and I think, her breath hitched, I think we're done. The last thread snapped. Brandon's expression twisted, rage, desperation, disbelief battling across his face like a storm that couldn't settle. He pointed at Jim again, shaking. This isn't over. You think you can destroy my life and walk away clean. I'll fight this. I'll. Jim stepped forward, finally letting steel enter his voice. There's nothing left for you to fight, and no threats left that matter. For a moment, Brandon seemed like he might lunge, but fear kept him rooted. His eyes flicked between Jim and Emily, and when neither backed down, something inside him collapsed. He turned abruptly, storming off the porch and down the steps. Gravel flew as he peeled down the driveway, the sound fading into the distance like a tantrum being dragged behind a failing engine. Silence returned to the lake. Emily's breath collapsed into a sob the second the car disappeared from sight. Her shoulders shook, the weight of the truth, months in the making, finally breaking open. Jim stepped to her and pulled her into his arms, holding her the way he had when she was small, the way he'd held her after scraped knees and heartbreaks and nightmares. She clung to him, crying into his chest, her entire world shifting beneath her feet. I'm here, Jim whispered. You're safe. But even as he held her, he knew. This was only the beginning of the fallout. The clash wasn't fully over. And the consequences were still coming. Brandon's arrest didn't happen quietly. Men like him rarely allowed anything in their lives to end quietly. It happened. Ned, 3 days after the confrontation at Jim's lake house, on a crisp morning when the neighborhood was just waking up. Jim wasn't there, but he heard the details from Mercer firsthand later that afternoon. According to witnesses, Brandon had stepped out onto his porch, phone in hand, ready to unleash another tirade on whoever dared to answer. He didn't get the chance. 2 unmarked cars rolled up at the same time, doors opening in sync. Mercer was the first to speak, his badge glinting in the early light. Brandon Keene, he said, voice calm but commanding. You're under arrest for identity fraud, financial deception, and falsification of business documents across multiple states. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. A dog barked somewhere down the street. And Brandon, always so composed, always so polished, froze like a man who suddenly remembered gravity existed. That's ridiculous, he tried to argue, his voice cracking. You have nothing on me. This is a mistake. I didn't do anything. Mercer motioned to another officer who stepped forward with handcuffs. We have enough to indict you 3 times over. You forged vendor signatures. You opened credit lines under dead LLCs. You falsified tax documents. You used multiple identities to secure private loans. As the cuffs tightened around his wrists, Brandon's voice broke. You can't do this to me. I'm building a business. I'm building a future. No, Mercer told him quietly. You were building a trap. Brandon thrashed once, then twice, but it didn't matter. The officers maneuvered him into the backseat like a man being gently folded away, neatly, inevitably, permanently. And then the bombshell dropped. When Donna Keene arrived 15 minutes later, she came in hot, hair perfect, lipstick flawless, fury weaponized. She shoved past the caution tape and stormed toward Mercer. You let him go right now, she screamed. My son is not a criminal. This is a misunderstanding, a clerical error, and we will sue the entire department. Mercer didn't even blink. Mrs. Keene, you need to step back. No, you listen to me, detective, she hissed. My son is innocent. I want him released this instant. Mercer nodded to an officer who handed him a slim file. He opened it and held it toward her. You might want to read before demanding anything. 2 of the forged LLCs, the ones tied to fraudulent tax filings. He tapped the page. They list you as co-owner. Donna's face drained of color so completely it looked as if someone pulled the blood straight from under her skin. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I didn't sign, I never." "You didn't sign in person," Mercer said, "but you're listed as an accomplice. Whether you knew or not, your name is on the paperwork." Donna staggered back, heels wobbling, breath shaking. In that moment, the polished veneer she always wore cracked for the first time. She looked around frantically, as if searching for a version of reality that wouldn't collapse in on her. But the truth didn't bend. It broke. Emily learned the next part while sitting at Jim's kitchen table, a mug of untouched tea cooling in her hands. She had come for clarity, but the storm of information hit her harder than she expected. Mercer sat across from her, papers spread out neatly, not to intimidate, but because he believed she deserved to see every piece of her own reality. "Emily," he said gently, "there's something else you need to know." She braced herself. "What is it?" Mercer slid a new set of documents toward her. "Brandon opened multiple insurance policies in your name." Her breath caught. "In my name, I never signed." "You didn't," Mercer confirmed. "Your signatures were forged." Emily stared at the pages. Her own name printed over and over in handwriting that looked close to hers but not quite. Close enough to fool a clerk, not close enough to fool an investigator. Life insurance, liability insurance, even a policy linking you to his dissolved business, Mercer continued. If his lenders came for him, they may have tried coming for you financially or legally, maybe worse. Emily's eyes filled instantly. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know any of this." Jim placed a hand over hers. She didn't pull away. Mercer closed the folder softly. "The court has already frozen his accounts. Everything he tried to move, everything he tried to hide, it's locked. None of this can touch you now." Emily nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks one by one. "The prenup," she whispered. "The trust, they saved me, didn't they?" Jim finally spoke, his voice thick with the emotion he had carried alone for months. "Yes," he said quietly, "they did." Emily's face crumpled. Pain, relief, regret, all of it mixing until her breath came out in a shudder. "Dad," she choked, reaching for him. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see who he was. I didn't see what he was doing. I pushed you away when you were the only one who—" Jim pulled her into his arms before she could finish. She clung to him like someone who finally found air after being underwater too long. He whispered into her hair, steady and soft, the truth he had carried alone since the beginning. "This is why I hid it." Emily broke completely then, not from grief, but from understanding. And as she cried into his chest, Jim held her, knowing this was the turning point. Not the end of the story, but the beginning of her freedom. The decision came the morning after the shock settled, when Emily woke up in the guest room at Jim's house and realized she finally felt something she hadn't felt in months: clarity. Not peace, not confidence, but clarity. The kind that comes after devastation, when the truth becomes too sharp to ignore. She sat at the kitchen table wrapped in one of her mother's old quilts, staring at her untouched coffee. Jim didn't hover. He moved quietly around the kitchen, giving her the space she needed, while staying close enough to be steady if she reached for him. Finally, Emily looked up. "Dad, I want a divorce." The words didn't tremble. They didn't crack. They landed with the weight of someone who had walked through fire and come out scorched but standing. Jim sat across from her slowly. "Lisa can help you," he said. "She'll make sure you're protected every step of the way." Emily nodded, wiping the corner of her eye with her sleeve. "I don't want to be tied to him for one more minute than I have to." Within 48 hours, she was in Lisa Grayson's office, signing papers with a steadiness that surprised even her. Lisa guided her through each line with patience and precision, making sure Emily understood everything: her rights, her protections, the fallout she might face. "This isn't just a divorce," Lisa said gently as Emily signed the final page. "It's a separation from manipulation, from fraud, from danger. You're reclaiming your autonomy." Emily swallowed hard and nodded. "I want that. I want my life back." Across town, Brandon's attorney, an exhausted man who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last week, called Lisa's office repeatedly. When Lisa finally accepted one of the calls, his tone was pleading. "Look," he said, voice low, "my client, he's willing to negotiate. He wants leniency. Maybe we can resolve this without further legal damage." Lisa didn't entertain it for a second. "Your client committed fraud," she said coolly. "He forged signatures. He opened illegal accounts. He attempted financial exploitation of a spouse. There is no negotiation." "But if the family could show mercy—" "There will be none," Lisa interrupted. "Emily is filing, and the court will honor it." The attorney sighed, defeated. "I had to try." "You did," Lisa said. "Goodbye." And with that, the door to Brandon's influence slammed shut. In the weeks that followed, Emily moved with a quiet determination that surprised even her. She untangled her life piece by piece, her name from his accounts, her mail from his address, her future from his shadow. The emotional independence took longer, but she was reclaiming it day by day. Jim watched all of it with a mixture of heartbreak and pride. He had seen his daughter at her most fragile, and now he watched her rebuild herself with deliberate strength. She still cried sometimes, in the car, in the shower, on the phone late at night, but she also began to laugh again. Small laughs at first, the hesitant kind. Then bigger ones, the kind that sounded like wind returning to a hollow place. One afternoon she visited Jim with her laptop and a binder. "Dad, can we talk about the trust again? I want to understand it, really understand it." Jim nodded, his chest warming. "Of course, let's sit on the porch." They spent hours going through the structure, the protections, the reasons behind every clause he and Lisa had created. Emily asked questions, practical, thoughtful ones, her mind sharper now that it wasn't weighed down by manipulation. At the end of it, Jim reached for a pen and updated several guidelines. New protections, new clarifications, and something else, a clause that allowed Emily more agency now that she was seeing life clearly, not through someone else's influence. When they finished, she looked at him with a steadiness that resembled her mother's. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing what I couldn't." Jim placed his hand over hers. "You see it now, that's what matters." Emily moved into a small apartment close to downtown, one bedroom, exposed brick walls, a tiny balcony that overlooked a courtyard. It wasn't luxurious, it wasn't grand, but it was hers, her space, her beginning. Jim helped her move in, carrying boxes up the narrow staircase while Emily arranged dishes and folded linens. They worked quietly, comfortably. That night, after setting up her bed and hanging the picture of her and her mother on the wall, she hugged him tightly. "I'm starting over," she whispered. "I know," Jim said, "and you're doing it the right way." He visited often, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes bringing a new lock for her door, sometimes just bringing himself, the steady presence she had missed, the one she had almost lost. They sat together on her tiny balcony, watching the city lights blink on one by one, talking about simple things, work, memories, plans. No manipulation, no tension, just two people healing. Little by little, peace returned. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But slowly, like dawn creeping over a dark horizon. Emily found her footing. Jim found his daughter again. And as the weeks stretched into stability, they both knew the worst was behind them, even though the legal fallout, the emotional aftershocks, and the final stages of resolution still waited on the horizon. Peace had come, but the journey wasn't over yet. The first counseling session took place in a quiet office on the second floor of a converted craftsman home, warm lighting, soft rugs, shelves lined with books about family, trauma, and reconnection. Emily sat on one side of the couch, legs crossed, hands folded tightly in her lap. Jim sat on the other, posture straight, his calmness more practiced than genuine. They hadn't done anything like this before. Not together. Not as adults trying to stitch back a bond torn by months of silence, fear, and manipulate. Ian, the therapist, a woman in her 60s with gentle eyes, let the room settle before speaking. "You've both survived a deeply traumatic situation," she said. "The goal here isn't to assign blame, it's to rebuild understanding, to reconnect where things fractured." Emily nodded. Jim did too, though he wasn't sure he could speak yet. His chest was tight, his throat felt thick. He had faced down auditors, fraudsters, and corporate liars without flinching, but sitting here, across from his daughter, felt like standing on fragile ice. The therapist turned to Emily first. "What would you like to say to your father today?" Emily took a breath that shivered at the end. "Dad, I know I hurt you." Her voice wavered. "And I didn't mean to. I didn't see what was happening. I didn't understand how much you were trying to protect me. I just thought you didn't trust me." Jim swallowed, his heart tightening. Emily continued, "But I realize now I didn't understand the weight of my inheritance. I never treated it like something real. I never thought about what it meant to our family, or to you, or to Mom. It wasn't just money. It was history." Jim felt the words hit deeper than he expected. "I didn't understand any of that," she said. "Not until I almost lost it, and almost lost you." The therapist gave Jim a small nod, inviting him to speak. Jim exhaled slowly. "Emily," he said, his voice low, rough around the edges, "I hid the inheritance because I knew someone would try to use it against you one day. I didn't know it would be him. I just recognized the signs, the behavior, the pressure." His hands tightened on his knees. "But I should have explained things better," he continued. "I should have told you sooner. I should have trusted you with the truth before someone else manipulated the gaps I left behind." Emily's eyes filled, not with guilt this time, but with understanding. Jim rubbed his thumb against the edge of his palm, a nervous habit he hadn't realized she remembered until she reached over and placed her hand gently on his. "Dad," she whispered, "you did the best you could. I see that now, and I want to understand everything. The inheritance, the trust, the responsibility. I want you to teach me. I want to be ready for it." Jim felt something shift in him, small but profound. The weight he'd carried for years, the fear of failing her, the fear of losing her, loosened its hold. "I'd like that," he said, "more than you know." Over the next several weeks, they attended counseling together every Tuesday evening. The conversations weren't always easy. Sometimes Emily cried. Sometimes Jim shut down and needed a moment. Sometimes they argued gently, trying to unlearn the miscommunications that had built up over the years. But slowly, carefully, their voices softened. Their silences stopped being walls and started becoming spaces where the other could breathe. They talked about the inheritance, not as a number, but as a legacy. Jim explained how his father had built the family's financial foundation during years of relentless work, how each generation added to it with intention, discipline, sacrifice. Emily listened differently now, not like a child being lectured, but like a future steward of something precious. "I didn't realize it was a responsibility," she said during one session. "All I ever saw was the weight you carried, not the meaning behind it." Jim nodded. "I didn't want you to feel the burden before you were ready, but you are ready now." Her smile came slowly. "I feel ready for the first time." Outside therapy, Emily threw herself into rebuilding her life. She took on new projects at work, volunteered for leadership tasks, attended professional seminars. She came home exhausted but fulfilled and proud of her progress, grounded in her independence. Jim watched from a respectful distance, offering support without involvement. It was the balance he never quite found when she was younger, and now it felt like both of them were learning how to walk together without stepping on each other's shadows. One evening, Emily invited him to her apartment for dinner, her first attempt at cooking something beyond pasta and toast. Jim smiled as she burned the edges of the chicken, laughed at herself, then brought the plate to the table proudly. They talked for hours afterward about her job, her plans, her dreams. She asked about his past, his marriage, his childhood, things she had never thought to ask when she was younger. And Jim shared quietly but openly, letting her see corners of his life he had kept tucked away. Somewhere in that conversation, without either of them naming it, something healed. Something old. Something important. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, as they sat on her tiny balcony listening to the distant hum of traffic, Emily leaned her head on his shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. "Dad," she said softly, "I feel like I have you back." Jim closed his eyes. "You never lose. Me," he whispered, "but I'm glad you can see me again." Her hand found his. Their bond, strained, tested, bent nearly to the point of breaking, was stronger now than it had ever been. And Jim felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. His heart healing. And the story, their story, finding its way toward peace. Spring arrived slowly that year, shy at first, then in full, confident bloom. The trees around Charlotte turned soft green again, the air warmed, and sunlight poured through windows that had spent months holding back winter's gray weight. It felt like the world itself was rebuilding piece by piece, at the same pace Emily and Jim were. Emily's life shifted first. She landed a new position at a boutique marketing firm downtown, one that valued her creativity and gave her room to grow. On her first week, she woke up early every morning, dressed with purpose, and walked into the office with a confidence she'd earned, not borrowed. The work was challenging, but she thrived in it, late nights spent drafting campaigns, afternoons pitching ideas in meeting rooms where her voice mattered. Jim watched her transformation with quiet awe. She wasn't just healing. She was becoming. He often found himself smiling when she texted him small updates. "Dad, my idea made it into the final pitch deck. Got my first client call today, nailed it. Lunch breaks on the balcony at work feel like heaven." The Emily who had once leaned on someone else for direction was now steering her own life with steady hands. And inspired by her momentum, or maybe nudged by it, Jim finally turned toward his own long-neglected life. He started with the lake house. For years, he had let it sit unchanged, frozen in time since his wife passed. The wallpaper she chose still clung to the hallways. The curtains she hemmed by hand still hung in the living room. Her paint samples still sat in the drawer by the phone. Beautiful memories, yes, but ones that had begun to feel like anchors. One morning, Jim stood in the kitchen, looked at the faded cabinets and said out loud to no one, "It's time." He hired contractors, picked out new finishes, removed old carpeting, opened up walls. The house grew brighter, fresher, more alive. The renovations weren't an erasure, they were a renewal, a recognition that life could move forward without abandoning what came before. Even Tom noticed the change. Tom stopped by one afternoon with coffee in hand, surveying the updated kitchen with a slow whistle. "Well, look at you," he said, nudging Jim's shoulder. "Didn't think you'd ever pick up a paint sample again." Jim chuckled. "Didn't think I'd want to." Tom took a seat at the counter. "You should do more than renovate, you know. You should travel. You've talked about going back to Maine for years, or heading out west, or taking that fishing trip you kept promising yourself." Jim's smile faded gently. Travel had always belonged to the life he shared with his wife, road trips, quiet cabins, small towns with diners only locals knew. After she died, the idea of traveling alone felt like reopening a wound. "I don't know if I'm ready," Jim admitted. Tom placed a hand on his shoulder. "You will be, and when you are, go." Jim nodded, letting the words settle, letting the possibility take root. A week later, Emily stopped by the lake house after work with a small gift bag in her hands. She didn't say what was inside, just insisted he open it in the living room, where the light is good. He sat on the edge of the sofa and lifted the tissue paper, pulling out a simple wooden frame. Behind the glass was a photo he hadn't seen in years, Emily at 6 years old, holding his hand with both of hers as they stood by the lake, her hair wild in the wind, her smile unrestrained and pure. Emily watched him carefully. "I found it in Mom's memory box," she said softly. "I thought maybe you'd want it somewhere you could see it, every day." Jim stared at the picture for a long moment. The room blurred slightly, though he blinked the feeling back before tears could fall. He hadn't cried in front of his daughter in decades, but this moment threatened to undo him. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Emily smiled gently. "It's us, before life got complicated." He nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you, Em." She sat beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder in quiet companionship. No rush, no heaviness, just presence, connection, healing. In the following weeks, father and daughter celebrated small victories together: Emily's first successful project at work, Jim's newly renovated porch, fresh flowers in the kitchen, a repaired fence along the lakeshore. None of it spectacular, all of it meaningful. The pain that once shaped their days didn't vanish. It transformed into strength, into awareness, into something they could stand on. Spring deepened, sunlight spilled across the lake, and for the first time in a long time, both Jim and Emily felt the horizon stretching ahead, wide open, possible. Their lives were no longer defined by what they survived, but by what they were becoming. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind where the lake outside Jim's window barely moved, as if the world itself had settled into a gentle pause. Jim was at his desk sorting through old investment statements when he heard a soft knock at his door. Emily stepped inside, a notebook in her hands, her expression warm but purposeful. "Dad," she said, taking a slow breath, "can you teach me, really teach me, about the trust, about everything?" Jim froze. Not out of fear, out of pride. He'd waited years to hear those words. Waited through the distance, the misunderstandings, the heartbreak, the danger. And now she stood in front of him, not as a child overwhelmed by a world she didn't understand, but as a woman ready to take responsibility for her future. He gestured toward the kitchen table. "Of course, sit down." Emily pulled out a chair and opened her notebook, pen ready. Jim gathered several folders, spreading them out in clean rows: stock summaries, property reports, legacy documents spanning 3 generations of Harlow stewardship. "We'll start simple," he said. "This isn't about numbers, it's about understanding where everything came from." He pointed to the oldest folder. "Your grandfather built the backbone of this trust. Conservative investing, steady growth, no shortcuts. He believed wealth only matters if it outlives the person who holds it." Emily listened intently, absorbing every word. Jim continued, "When your mother and I took over managing it, we didn't expand it with risk. We expanded it with discipline, patience, choices meant to protect the next generation, you." Emily flipped to a new page in her notebook. "I never realized it was so intentional. I always thought inheritance was just something wealthy families passed down without thinking." Jim smiled softly. "No, sweetheart, it was the most thought-out thing we ever did, especially once we knew we'd only have one child." Emily paused, the weight of the statement settling between them. He moved on gently, showing her charts of long-term investments, safe growth portfolios, low-liability properties. She asked thoughtful questions, took careful notes, circled terms she wanted to look up later. With each question, Jim felt something loosen in his chest, something he had carried too long. Hours passed without either of them noticing. Eventually, Emily set her pen down and rubbed her eyes. "Dad, thank you for all of this, for keeping it safe, for keeping me safe." Jim looked at her, the moment settling deeper than she probably knew. I did what I had to, even when it hurt. Emily nodded slowly. I know that now, and I'm sorry it took me so long to understand. He hesitated, then spoke the truth he'd kept buried. I was terrified I was losing you, Em. Not the inheritance, not the trust. You. Her eyes softened instantly. You didn't lose me. I felt like I might, he said quietly. When you pulled away, when he pushed you, I thought everything your mother and I built, the love, the trust, was slipping through my fingers. Emily pushed her chair back and stood. She walked around the table and knelt beside his chair, taking both of his hands in hers. Dad, she whispered, you didn't just protect my money. You protected my life. You protected my future. You gave me something no one else ever has. Tears crowded the edges of her eyes, but her voice remained steady. You gave me more than money. You gave me the chance to choose myself again. Jim swallowed hard, trying to maintain the composure he'd lived by all his life. But the emotion crept through anyway, not grief this time, but release. A slow unclenching of a heart that had spent too long bracing for loss. He pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly, his chin resting on her hair the way he used to when she was small. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. When they finally pulled apart, Emily wiped her cheeks and laughed softly. Well, I still don't understand half of these charts. Jim chuckled. Good, that means we have more to go over next time. Emily rose, gathering her notebook. I want to learn it all. I want to honor what you and Mom built. Jim nodded, feeling something he hadn't felt since before his wife died. Something warm, steady, deeply human. Redemption. Not for the decisions he made. He had never doubted those, but for the fear that had shadowed them. His daughter wasn't lost. She was ready. And for the first time, Jim felt truly at peace with the weight he'd carried for a lifetime. The cemetery was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that carried a softness rather than sorrow. A thin veil of mist lingered above the grass as Jim walked the familiar stone path, hands tucked in the pockets of his jacket. He'd made this walk countless times since his wife passed, but today felt different, not heavier, not lighter, just complete. He reached her headstone and paused. The granite was cool beneath his fingertips, the engraved letters worn slightly from years of sun and rain. Jim took a slow breath, letting the stillness settle into him, then whispered the words that had lived in his chest for months. She's safe now, he said. Our Emily, she's safe. His voice cracked on the last word, the emotion raw but gentle. You'd be proud of her. She fought her way back. She's thinking clearly again, stronger than ever. He smiled softly, imagining his wife's expression, that quiet, knowing smile she used to give when Emily discovered something true about herself. Jim stepped back, folding his hands in front of him as he continued speaking to the stone. I finally told her everything, about the trust, about the responsibility, about what we built, you, especially. I wish you could have seen her face when she understood. Footsteps approached behind him, light, familiar, careful. Emily. She walked up beside him, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, the same kind her mother used to pick near the lake. Without speaking, she placed them gently at the base of the headstone and brushed a loose hair behind her ear. For a long moment they simply stood together, not mourning, not grieving, just being present with the woman whose absence shaped so much of their lives. She'd be happy, Emily whispered, to know we're okay again. Jim nodded slowly. She would. A breeze drifted through the cemetery, rustling leaves and lifting a few strands of Emily's hair. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his in a gesture so natural, so instinctive. It filled Jim's chest with warmth he thought he'd never feel again. Walk with me, she asked. He nodded. They left the gravesite together, moving down the stone path, hand in hand like they used to when Emily was small. The morning sun pressed through the mist, turning it gold around the edges. Birds began chirping softly from the nearby trees, the world waking up in its own slow, peaceful rhythm. As they walked, Jim felt the memories rise around him. Emily running across the yard at 6 years old, tripping over her shoelaces. Emily crying into his shoulder the night before her first job interview. Emily drifting away under Brandon's influence. Emily returning, wounded but brave. Emily rebuilding herself piece by piece. And now Emily beside him, steady, whole, understanding. She broke the silence first, her voice quiet but certain. "Dad, I know now why you did it." Jim looked at her. The inheritance, the trust, the secrecy. She glanced down at their hands. "I used to think it meant you doubted me, that you didn't trust me to make my own decisions." She stopped walking and turned toward him, her expression open, honest. "But I understand now. You weren't protecting money from me. You were protecting me from what the money attracts." Jim's throat tightened. He nodded once slowly. She smiled, faint but warm. "I'm grateful you did. I'm grateful you were the one who carried that responsibility. And I'm grateful that you didn't give up on me when I pushed you away." Jim stepped closer and cupped the side of her face gently, something he hadn't done since she was a child. "Emily," he whispered, "it was always for you." Her eyes shimmered, and she leaned into his hand, letting the emotion settle without rushing it away. They continued their walk, talking softly about simple things, her job, his plans to travel, the house renovation, the quiet rhythm their lives had finally restored. No tension, no shadows, just peace shared between two people who had earned it. Jim felt the weight of the past months more clearly than ever, the betrayal, the danger, the heartbreak, the choices he never wanted to make. But also the redemption, the clarity, the love rebuilt and strengthened through hardship. When they reached the cemetery gate, Emily squeezed his hand one last time. "Dad, thank you for everything." Jim looked at her, his voice steady and sure as he spoke the truth he had lived by. In the end, hiding her inheritance wasn't distrust. It was love strong enough to withstand betrayal.